Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our Workflows webinar. I am Elizabeth Morse. I'm the event manager here on the marketing team. A couple items I want to mention before we get started. You can expect about a 30-minute presentation followed by some time for your questions and answers. You're welcome to ask questions at any point throughout the webinar today. Just use that Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen and type those in, and I'll be monitoring that throughout. Today's webinar is being recorded, so you'll be able to view it within about 24 hours. It'll be on our YouTube channel as well as our website, so you can share the recording with colleagues who may have missed the webinar today or watch it again. We're super excited to have Senior Implementation Consultant Kevin Elby with us today. We're going to explore how to streamline order processes, ensure consistency and accuracy, and reduce bottlenecks. We'll showcase real examples of diverse workflows, powerful automations, and how our customers have significantly improved efficiency and reduced staffing needs. So without further ado, Kevin, why don't you introduce yourself and take it away?
Awesome. Thanks, Elizabeth. Yep, so like Elizabeth said, I'm a implementation consultant here at Cavallo. I've been here for close to 6 years now. That time I've worked on around 230 different projects. So that's all sorts of things of just implementing full implementations of our software, like SalesPad Desktop or Inventory Manager or Ship Center, to creating reports, helping on workflows, all sorts of different stuff. A little about myself first. Really interested in music. I'm actually in the process of writing an album now. I just released some music for the first time last week. Really love restaurants, especially here in Grand Rapids. There's a lot of great restaurants that are always opening up that I love checking out. And then also just a big fan of video games and getting back into reading a lot last year. But we are going to jump right into it. So for anyone who's been a customer of SalesPad for any point in time, you're probably at least familiar with the general concept of workflows, but just kind of a refresher. Essentially, the workflow functionality is working off of the batch functionality coming from GP on the sales order side of things. So just kind of general idea of as you create your orders, your invoices, quotes, or returns. Sometimes people have it set up where it's just like a new order batch, or maybe they're just putting in posting batches based on the date. But on the SalesPad side of things, rather than having these batches as kind of their own little silos, where they just kind of sit on their own space, not really interconnected together at all, we have the ability to create a whole sales order process with an expected flow forwarding from one sales batch to another one. And that can utilize things like various workflow rules and plugins to automate workflow processes, various functions on the back end, and then just make sure sales orders are going through the process they should be and nothing's getting overlooked. This way, you can have a visibility of where your orders are in the sales order process and also make sure they're getting to where they need to be. Over the last few years, we've also expanded our workflow capabilities to other business objects as well. So where previously you could only create workflows for sales documents, so again, quotes, orders, invoices, and returns, we now have the ability to create workflows for other business objects too. So that can be things like purchase orders, customer records, item records, and a whole bunch of other ones that I'll get into shortly. There are some differences between the sales order workflow to the business object one, but a lot of the same logic still applies of having different sales batches, various plugins as you forward from one batch to another one, and having your own logic set for workflow rules and conditions. While I could talk about a lot of these things for a while, it'd be a lot easier just to jump straight into the demo. So that is what we are going to do. Let me open up my SalesPad here. And we're going to start off on the sales order workflow side of things. So this is going to be more admin side of things. So if you're not seeing these menus, it's probably just because you need to have the updated access. But we're going to go to the workflow setup here. And here is where you're going to see all of the different business objects that we can create workflows for. So again, sales document is going to be the key one for the quotes, orders, invoices, and returns. And all these other ones are newer-ish over the last few years. So again, the idea of creating workflows for like customers, item records, manufacturing orders, if you have our add-on licensing for manufacturing, also things like opportunities and so on. So we're going to start off with the sales order side of things. And here is where we're going to see the workflow editor. So off on the left side of the screen, you're going to see one record per sales doc ID that you have configured within GP. So right now I'm just showing a few examples for my just kind of basic quote order invoice return. So we'll start off with the quote side of things, keep it a little simple. But here you're going to see two different grids. On the top grid is going to be, actually we'll start with the standard order one. There we go. On the top grid is going to be all of your queues or batches, as you might know them in GP. And then down below, you're going to have all of your workflow rules. So to start off with, the first one that you have set up in here is going to be the first batch that a sales order is going to get dropped into if it's created within SalesPad. So right now I've got it set up where if I'm creating a standard order, my order is going to pop up in a batch called new order. And then from there, it kind of follows the logic or kind of reading it from left to right to see how that flows as we go from one workflow queue to another one. So before I get too far, I'm also going to show you kind of a bit of a visual so you can see what all that we're working with. So if you don't already have this available, this is something we added to SalesPad, I think 2 or so years ago. It's our workflow visualizer that helped work on with a developer of ours. Essentially what this does is shows you the entire visual of your workflow that you have set up here. So you can see, again, new orders, the batch that it starts off with. So I create an order. My order is going to start off in that batch. And then from there, we've got our salad lines. That's going to imply what the expected next queue is. And then you can see we also have dotted lines that are going to show our workflow rules, which is what's referenced down here. So with the workflow rules, essentially what those are is giving you the ability to kind of say, as I forward from new order, by default, where I wanted to go next is my sales acknowledgement plus queue, which I can see up here at the top. I see my new order next queue is sales acknowledgement. But maybe before I have it go that route to go on to split back order plus and so on, maybe you want to perform some credit limit or credit hold checks because maybe we don't want our orders to actually go forward and start sending out emails and things to customers if it needs to be looked into first for other concerns like that. So I'll show you how that's configured, but essentially these workflow rules have the ability to kind of do these checks. So rather than just going immediately to there, it might go to our credit review queue first. From there, you can see just kind of for the expected path is sales acknowledgement plus. We've got some smart printing going on. Split back order plus, we're splitting it. And then you can see just kind of keeps going from there. Another thing to mention as well, too, that we have with our workflow, if you're not familiar with it, is the concept of auto forward queues. So on the sales order side of things is if you ever have a queue with a plus in the queue name like that, it's considered an auto forward queue. So that just means as an order is forwarded from that queue, it's going to automatically go to the next queue specified in the workflow configuration over here. So what makes this nice is you can have multiple things happen all through one forward. So rather than me having to forward an order from new order to sales acknowledgement plus, and then me having to forward it again to send out that email, and then forwarding it again to attempt to split it because maybe I have some back orders, these auto forward queues are red, where I'll just forward from there, reference any potential workflow conditions or plugins or anything like that, and then automatically go to the next queue from there. So that way, as you're forwarding, there's a lot of different things can all happen as expected and as intended to, rather than having to keep it a lot more manual and just forward from one order to another or from one batch to another. So before I get further into that side of things, we're going to talk about a few of the other options that we have in the screen as we're configuring our queues. So the first one is going to be the button caption. So all that's doing is just basically saying this is the button you're going to see on the order entry screen when you are attempting to forward the document. So give you a quick example. I'm going to open up an order here. I've got one right here. There we go. So, yep, that is just the button right here. Because when you're on the order entry screen, how a lot of this translates is you're going to have your batch field. So here you can see the specific batch you're in, and then that's your button. That's just basically forwarding it on to the next batch to reference all the workflow logic that we hear. So I've got it set for release, but I could say that as anything release or forward, Or sometimes what some customers will do to be more specific is they'll say like send to management or send PO notification, whatever makes sense. So these can be a lot more kind of descriptive. So users who are in the order entry screen, or maybe users that are more new and they don't know the process as well, can kind of see that button of like, oh, okay, send to management. I know what that means. Let me click that. It's ready to go to that next stage. So that is the button caption. And then next we have our plugin. So you can see here, there are a lot of different plugins so we can have do all sorts of different things. But I'm going to talk through just a few of the most common ones. So the first one is going to be smart printing. So what smart printing does is that is going to automatically print or email out a report that you have created in SalesPad through the report manager menu associated with your orders. So that way, rather than having to go to your order, click your print button, find your report. Let's see if I can find a good one here. 1 second. There you go. So just like my basic one, rather than having to do that, click the email and go through that manually, I can automate that process, whether that's emailing or printing. So how that works is twofold. One is having it set up as the plugin. And the next thing is it's going to look at the smart printing menu to see if anything's configured there to act upon. So if I go over here to the smart printing maintenance menu, what I would do is come in here and create a new record. So I could say, as the document is forwarding from the order to our standard order, regardless of the warehouse. So if you want to, you can also have it where maybe as it's forwarding out of a queue, maybe if it's one warehouse, it should go to a specific email. Maybe if it's another warehouse in the order, it should go to another email. You've got that ability. And for reference, that's just referencing the warehouse on the header of the order. And then here you've got your queue. So for this one right now, I've got it set up under new order. So I'll just say new order. And here's another thing where I could say maybe this is going to be specific to a salesperson on the order, because maybe this is a salesperson related email and we want to have different records in here. So we have different emails specified. And then I'm going to say this is regardless of who the user is that's forwarding it. And then here you'll be able to choose your order or the report. Let's see here. Yeah, so for this example, I'm just going to do my Cavallo packing slip. At this point, you can choose your printer if this is something you're choosing to print out. So you can see all the printers I've got in here if I want to just do my system default printer. Kind of a key thing to keep in mind with printers, though, is if you are setting this up, the dropdown you see here are the printers that are accessible to you as a user. So sometimes you do need to be cautious if you're the one setting this up, because if maybe there's multiple users forwarding from new order, but only some users have a specified printer available and some don't, other users who don't have the printer might run into errors. So you need to make sure that printer is accessible for all the users to be activating that smart printing. Unless you're doing like system default printer, where it's just going to be unique to whatever that customer has set up through their computer's control system panel and all that. Here you can choose the amount of copies that you want to print or email. Preview just basically means that report is going to preview to the screen. So if I had this set to none here for printer, it wouldn't actually print anything. It would just preview to the screen. And then maybe from there, I could export it to a PDF or email it or do something different. Other options here, you can get more into the emailing side of things. So if you want to, you can choose to email billing, shipping, or the sales rep. So for billing and shipping, that's just going to be referencing the address card and what you're going to have down in these two fields here. And these are just coming from the email fields and the associated address records we've specified to ship to and bill to. That is needed, you can update these manually too. If maybe for this particular order, there's a different email address that you go to. And then sales rep is just going to the email account associated with the sales rep, which you can find that in SalesPad through the salesperson search record if you wanted to update it over here. I think that comes from the GP side of things as well. And then email templates. So for this one, if you are sending an email, you also have the functionality to choose what is actually going into the body and the subject of the email. So it'll be back in the setup utilities tab. And then we can go to email template editor. And then here we can see all sorts of different stuff. So you can see I've got a test email one that I've created here. For reference to, if you create one, you're going to see there's different types. sales order or sales documents, obviously going to be email template available on sales order related documents, but you'd also do things for purchase orders and so on. But up at the top here, you're going to choose what your email subject is. And then in the bottom, it's going to be what's in the body of the email. One nice thing with this as well is you have the ability to actually pull in information or fields from the sales document to make it more unique as these emails are getting sent out. So that's going to be through the button up here. And the options you're going to see here are going to be unique to the document type that you're using or the template type. So you can see there's all sorts of different stuff I can pull from, like the customer PO number is a very common one. If I want to do the customer number or name, and it's basically just kind of copying or clicking those, and then it just throws it in there. And then it looks kind of like that, but once it's actually sending the email, or if you're doing it over here as well too, you'll be able to see it actually kind of translates over. Yep, so like right there is where I did that for the order number. So that way your emails can be a lot more unique and relevant to what's getting sent out, rather than the alternative, someone having to manually type it out every single time for every order. Just have that all set for you. So that is the email template. It's also send as HTML option. So if you have a more simple report configured, sometimes it makes sense to do that. So rather than our report over here being attached as a PDF, it will basically be embodied into the body of the email. It might also include as a PDF then, but I can't remember offhand. But sometimes that's nice if you want to give customers a way to like search for information they know in the email. So that way it show up in the body to be able to searchable rather than just as a PDF where it wouldn't pick it up as they're doing an email search. Email UDF is pretty nice too. We usually kind of keep that hidden away by default for some reason. But if you have a user-defined field that's a text field on the sales order header, we can reference that to know who things should get emailed to. So as an example, I know I've had some customers in the past where they wanted to email the relevant warehouse manager associated with the warehouse that the order is going to be fulfilled from. So what I ended up doing is creating a user-defined field called like X warehouse email. And then I had scripting to basically check at certain points of the workflow before this email went out, say like, hey, it looks like this is the warehouse called North. So update this user-defined field to be that warehouse manager's email. And then we would reference that through there in the dropdown. Then from there, choose your reply to email. If you got a static email or emails you want to go to. And also if you want resources that are attached on the document, those can also be included generally as well too, based on how those are set up. So that is a lot of the smart printing side of things. Beyond that, going through a few other more common ones, we also have our, let's see, split sales document. So for anyone that's not familiar with that, what that functionality does is it'll look at all the line items on your order and gives you the potential to split them off into separate orders. So I won't go into it too much, but just kind of give you a super quick overview. I'm going to create or update my order here. Give that a second to think it over. And then actually we're going to do this here. We're going to say this is mostly fulfilled, but maybe there's something that isn't. And then if I activate my split sales document, I'm going to do this manually, but this will be activated automatically through the workflow if we set it up that way. You can kind of get this pop-up where you can see off to the side, and this is all configured through security as well too, of various things that we could split the document by. So right now I've got it set up to split by the back order quantities, where I take my quantity of 9 that isn't back ordered and my quantity of 1 that is back ordered and would split it off into 2 orders. So this order would be made historical, and then it would create new ones with like a .1 and then a .2 for the other one. So a lot of customers will do that when it comes to back orders, where they're fine with not shipping everything all at once. So there'll be scenarios where the document's forwarded, and then it might be split off. And then with those 2 documents, we'll workflow conditions kind of say like, hey, if there's anything back ordered, which would be this .2 document, have that move to a back order queue. Otherwise, maybe move forward on for the other document that is allocated and ready to be fulfilled to a ready to pick queue. So that way it just splits it off automatically. And we can have it set up where it wouldn't give you this pop-up. It would just do it for you all on the back end. So that's a big one. A lot of customers use that as well. Sometimes they'll also use it to split off dropship items, or maybe based on the shipping method or the warehouse. If maybe you've got an order where the line items are getting shipped to different warehouses. Then let's see here. So that's that. Purchase order generation is also a big one that's super helpful. So essentially the idea for anyone who's not familiar with that is there's some configuration there where we'll create a line item user defined fields called usually X vendor. And then from there, you've got a drop down where you can specify a vendor where if it's back ordered or marked as dropship, it would automatically generate a purchase order through. So I could say maybe for this item, Ace Trav is my vendor. And then from there, I'll do this manually, just do the click, but this would happen automatically as it forwards to the designated point in the process. But it'll just be that. PO created. And then it's thinking about it. And there we go. You can see it just popped up the little line item there. Now if I go to my purchases tab, I can see that automatically just generated a purchase order for that quantity of one that was back ordered. So that is something a lot of customers use to just make purchasing a lot easier if you're generating your purchase orders based on specific sales order need. Because again, it just basically be forwarding through, and I've got it set up where if it goes through my purchase order generation queue, anything's back ordered, or if anything is marked as dropship, and I've got a purchase order or a vendor specified, it's just going to automatically create that PO. And then I technically updated that manually, but usually I'll do scripts with customers as well too, where if they have it set up in GP as a primary vendor option, I'll auto-populate it with that. So then that's one less thing for people to have to worry about, but that can be a big help. And that also can translate over to the purchase order workflow side of things. So that is that there. Yeah, again, I could go into all sorts of different stuff, but those are some of the more common ones you'll see. But otherwise, we've got that. So again, we've got our orders in the new order batch. Click the release button. That'll activate the plugin. From there, it'll reference the print button. So all that means is just as a forward orders or as an order is forwarded from that queue, whether that should give users this pop-up here. So that way they would have the option to manually print or email something out. So if it's maybe going to be kind of dynamic in terms of what users are printing or emailing at that stage, and you can't do smart printing where it's always just going to automatically do it the same way, you can give users that option instead. You got read only. So if you had any batches that you would want to be read only as users open them up, that's an option. More commonly, I'll see that usually used like a ready to invoice batch. So that way users aren't actually in those orders about to get invoiced before they get posted or transferred to invoices on the GP side of things. But then from there, it'll go to next queue. And then we also have a description field. So if you want to, you can always add additional details here as well. So usually I'll do that with customers as we're working on workflows just to kind of keep in mind of like general nodes of like, oh yeah, that's supposed to happen here, or maybe this process outside of SalesPad's happen in this queue, and that's how it moves from this batch to another one. Down below, we're gonna get more into the workflow rule side of things. So I'm gonna open one up that I already have here for credit limit eval. So it's pretty simple. You can see the description. You can choose when you want it to evaluate. So right now I've got it set up where it's just as you forward from new order. But if I maybe wanted this to forward or evaluate as you forward from new order and credit review, I can just throw that in there. And they can do both of those. Then if that evaluates as true, it would move to the credit review queue. If you want to, you can also apply holds as well too. They'd be set up on the GP side of things. And then down below is where you're going to see all of your different conditions that you'd be referencing to know when this workflow rule is evaluating as true. So you can see here, we've got a whole big list of various out-of-the-box options. So credit limit, it's a common one. Very simple, just when the customer has exceeded their credit limit. So obvious reason why you want to move to credit review. Back order is also a common one, which is basically when any line of the document's back ordered. And then for some that have a little more flexibility is our sales doc field equals. So what that does is this is where we're going to be referencing information from the database. So for anyone familiar with the SQL side of things, or just some of the backend fields in SalesPad, I think it's usually referencing like the SPV3 sales document search. So here's where I could be more specific and say like if the sales document total field And I'm using SD as a prefix because that's kind of how this formatting works for this particular one. If I could say if that's greater than $1,000, then maybe that'd be the scenario of where it should go to credit review. For added reference to is as you go in here and add these different items, these are all treated as and statements. So that just means that this needs to be true, and this needs to be true, and this needs to be true. Because if one of these isn't true, then this won't evaluate to move it to the whatever the move to queue is, and it's just going to follow the next path and go from there. Another thing to mention as well too is your sequence of workflow rules is very important. So for example, I have two different workflow rules here that are both evaluating on the new order queue. So right now they both go to the credit review queue, but if maybe one went to a different queue, but they both evaluated as true, it's always going to be the one with the lower sequence is what's going to take precedence to know where it should go from there. So as you're doing kind of various workflow rules and getting those configured, you always need to be mindful of if you have multiple rules all evaluate in the same queue, getting these structured or sorted in a way of like, yes, this one is the highest priority, this shouldn't take place, then this one, and so on. So that is the idea there. Another thing that's kind of newer in SalesPad 2 is our workflow review tab over here. So what this does is kind of checks for various gotcha scenarios where your workflow might be broken or not set up right. So it's going to be things like maybe you've got a next queue that doesn't exist. So maybe I came in here and I said, ready to invoice, because maybe I forgot that's actually how I set it up, which there is a character limit and that is coming from GP. So we'll just do ready to invoice, something there, misspelled it. Save our document. And now you can see this just threw up a few things that just ran into. So for the ready to ship queue, contains queues that do not exist. So that's kind of a nice, easy way to say if you're making changes of like, oh, whoops, yep, that doesn't exist. Let me go back here. Get that changed, get that saved. Cool, now we're set. Some other things it checks as well too is if you have a queue marked as smart printing, but you don't actually have that record created in the smart printing maintenance. Because again, it's kind of twofold. You got to set it up there and also in that menu. Excuse me. So that is good. And technically I have that, but I didn't save that. So if I come back here, there we go. You can see it just dropped out for the new order one because now I've got that saved and created. So that is a lot of the workflow setup. Let's see. And again, workflows are super cool just in the sake of they can really be as simple or as complex as you want them to be. I have some workflows I've created where it's literally only 3 or 4 or 5 queues, and I have some where it's easily like dozens and dozens of queues because there's just all sorts of different workflow rules and logic that we want to have in place. So it really depends on what meets your criteria. One other thing to mention as well too with the workflow rules is the side note is I showed you a lot of the out of the box options, but we also can create custom workflow conditions. So there's a SQL store procedure for anyone who's more familiar with that side of things with SQL and scripting, where we can create logic in there and go to the table where all of this is stored at, which is, let me see here. Yeah, workflow condition. So I can basically go into this table in the back end of the database and create new ones and create the logic for that. So there is ways to basically do that. So these workflows are really made to be custom tailored to whatever your process is and whatever makes sense for your business needs. So really, there's not a lot we can't do. I've done all sorts of different unique things for customers. So if you've got some ideas in mind, definitely reach out to your account resource because there's, yeah, it's wild. Some of the stuff that I've done for customers where like, for example, with because of a big thing also is with our workflow, they're really tying to automation agent because we have batch forwarding automations. So rather than having to manually forward from a particular batch, our automation add-on can automatically forward it for you on a set schedule. So I know I've had 1, 2 where we utilized our automation for automatically transferring orders to invoices in set batches. And I think customer mentioned, I guess, a few times a week they would have to go into the office at 5 or 6 in the morning to transfer their orders to invoices. And through the automation that we created there in relation to the workflow, they have to do that It's all automatically handled for them. Then also as those invoices are created, they'd automatically send out emails to the customer. And you can see in my invoice workflow, I've got something kind of similar of once my invoice is created, that'll forward on to an email plus where you email the customer and go to a ready to post queue. And then I also have some other workflow rule logic in here to say like, hey, maybe for certain customers, this should actually be printing out. So got that set up. We'd have a separate smart printing record to print out the report, and then that can get email or mailed out instead. So all sorts of different stuff we can do there. Let's see. One other thing to get to as well too is when it gets to the workflow, as you're getting that all configured, that plays a big part with the sales monitor. I won't go into that too much because I'm assuming most people are probably familiar with that. But this is just where you're going to see all of your different sales doc IDs and then all of the batches you've created in your workflow and where they're at. So just super easy way to have that big visual and kind of see like, okay, in my standard order queue, it looks like I have around $3,400 of orders in my back order queue, which amounts to 4. And then there's also ways you can set this up where you can have a batch days and hours field. So it's just kind of added extra visibility. I come in here and sort and say, okay, it looks like this order has been in my new order batch for 200, or is it 2,400 days? Probably should look into that. So a lot of this, just there's so many ways this ties into other parts of the software just to add a lot more visibility, automate, and just overall make your life a lot easier and save a lot of time for you. The next thing I'm going to jump into as well too is the business object workflow side of things. So again, there's all sorts of different things we now create workflows for in newer versions of SalesPad. Most common one I see is definitely purchase order and customers. So I've got a test workflow here. And it's going to be a little bit different for anyone who has not seen this yet. Again, a lot of the same logic still kind of applies with how it works. But the key thing is the keys. So rather than the workflows or the sales order workflow, where you're basically stuck with you're creating one workflow per sales stock ID, per sales stock type, with the business object workflows, you can create your own logic for how many workflows you want to create. So for example, you just kind of create a key in here, and here is where you're choosing the logic. So for purchase orders, there's kind of been a few different ways I've done this with most customers. Usually I kind of have it set where maybe it's based on the PO type of standard or dropship. So I've got this workflow here. So if I'm creating a purchase order, and it's a big deal specifically in SalesPad, because if you create your PO in GP, it won't pick this up automatically, at least get attached to this workflow. But if my PO type is standard, then it would automatically get assigned to this workflow. And that has its own like equivalent of the sales monitor as a purchase order monitor. Some other things I've done with customers as well too, where it's a little more unique than just standard or drop ship, is we'll create a user-defined field drop down option on the purchase order header. And from there, we give the user set options that relate to their different purchase order workflows. And so that'd be also something we could reference in here, just saying whatever that value is, if it's option A, then it should go to this one. Then we'd reference the other values in different workflows. So that is the idea with keys. And again, we've got our assigned to business object here. So again, if you're creating these purchase orders in SalesPad, it should reference this to automatically attach it to the relevant workflow if it fits any of that logic. Otherwise, if you did create a PO outside of SalesPad, you'd be able to use this option to see all your purchase orders that are open and not assigned to workflows currently. So I could say like, okay, yep, maybe I just implemented this workflow and I now want all these to go to what I've just created. So I could select all those, assign it, and go through all these purchase orders into this workflow now. I've also had some customers where I've created an automation to do that automatically on a daily basis, because for a customer, it just made sense for them to create their POs in SalesPad, at least at that point in time, until they built out more functionality in SalesPad that we're doing through a consulting project. Next, you've got your queues here. So again, very similar to what you have on the sales order side of things. So I've got a super simple one of just new purchase order. So that's a queue my POs would start in. Forward from there, I've got it through a notify vendor plus queue. A slight difference is the pluses aren't automatically treated as auto forwards. Technically aren't needed over here, but I usually do it just for visibility of what I do in the sales order side of things, but just marking it off as auto forward here. So see, I've got my 2 queues here with pluses, and I've got them both marked as auto forward. So again, if it forwards through that queue, it's going to automatically go through the next queue from there or reference any workflow rules. Some additional stuff too that's kind of nice is with each queue, you have the ability to also disable printing, because maybe you've got to manage a review batch and you don't want users going in and printing or emailing things at that point in time. You can also choose if queues are read only or not. So for my approval acquired, I think I've got this backwards right now. I think I'd be selecting all other batches. But from there, you can kind of see if any user's not under that security group or the inverse of that, they would be read only. So you've got more control in that aspect. Also got your rules here. So a little bit different. Basically, the rules are over here. And then as you click on one, you're going to see all of your conditions. Again, those are treated as and statements for as many conditions you create in there. All of them need to be true to perform the action listed down below. So for this condition, I've got it set up basically as kind of a total, see if this is a larger purchase order or not. So if my purchase order is greater than $1,000, which here, yeah, total greater than or equal to 1,000. And you can see there's all sorts of various different fields you can reference, including, yeah, vendor specific fields, purchase order, user defined fields. But if that's the case, then it's going to move my purchase order to the manager notify plus queue. And then through there, I could have something else set up where it's going to send out an email to the manager so they're aware they've got a purchase order that requires their review and approval. Let's see. A few other things to mention as I was doing a value comparison. We can also do field comparisons. I haven't really used this one as much, but if you did like the required date was lesser than or greater than the promised date, maybe it should get evaluated to go a different path. We can also do SQL procedures. Haven't used that one personally. C# scripts do come in hand more often. That gets a little more technical, but here you can create scripts to check more unique scenarios that aren't available through like the value comparison. So as a common example, I've created scripts for customers to reference like line item information to kind of say like, hey, is there more than one warehouse specified on this purchase order? Well, maybe that needs to go through a different path. Or I think one of my customers, they track tracking numbers on the purchase order line level. So also it's something to kind of say like, hey, is there more than one purchase order across all PO lines? Okay, cool. We need to go this other path then. So got that, all sorts of different logic. And then with the actions, you can see too, we've got our email. So here you can choose purchase order email, choose one of our email templates we talked about before, choose your subject, who you want to send it to, which if you want to, you can hard code an email in there. We can also reference, yep, just kind of like we talked about, warehouse manager email, because maybe I've got this in the user defined field populated. So that's one action. If you want to print, similar idea there. Run script is where we'd be doing like more of a complex script that's maybe updating a value on the purchase order. Moving to just a queue, and then running a plugin. And these options are going to be kind of specific to whatever the business object is. So for this one, it might activate the add item to PO, maybe we're attaching a PO to a sales line, and so on. So all sorts of different stuff there. And then for add a reference, like I was talking about with this purchase order workflow, we also have our purchase order monitor. So yep, same exact thing as the sales monitor. I can now come in here and see all my different workflows and all my POs in there and open it from here. And then it's not called batch days and hours. I think it's called queue days or hours or something, where you can see that same information of how long your purchase orders have been in there for. Yep, queue days and hours. So it's super helpful, just gives you a lot more visibility. And again, with all those different conditions and workflows, you make sure all your purchase orders are going exactly where they need them to go. Then kind of briefly, just I know we're past the 30-minute mark a bit here, is just, there we go, customer workflows as well. So customer ones is definitely one of the more common ones that I've done with customers. For reference to, if I didn't mention before, the workflow visualizer is also available here on the business object workflow side of things. And this is what we have with customers. So something more commonly we have set up is they'll create a new customer. And before they actually want to start creating orders for those customers, they'll have a process where maybe they'll send them a customer packet. So if it's set up where you send an email to a customer with all sorts of stuff that they need to fill out for you as a customer entity, or basically kind of confirm like, okay, this is everything. I've got all of your credit related information, anything else you guys might need. So that's something initial. And then maybe that would go through an initial credit review. And then maybe from there you'd have it set up of like, cool, that was approved. Let's send out an email to the customer, let them know, and they'll go to a general customer queue where it just kind of waits. Or maybe it failed and we need to send out an email failure, or maybe that goes to a holding queue. So someone can manually write out email to the customer to kind of let them know, like, hey, these are the specific things are missing. This is what happened. We need this. And then from there, forward that onto the customer queue once all that's been addressed. Another thing too that kind of plays a part with this is the AR statement side of things. So with some customers, sometimes they'll use Automation Agent, our add-on, where we have automated AR statements that can get sent out. Or sometimes if it makes more sense to work through the workflow logic, we'll create it where maybe once a month, someone will forward all of our orders from our customer queue. And I've got it set up right now. We're like, hey, if the balance is greater than $0, activate this AR statement email to send out the AR statement to the customer, and then just move back in that customer queue. So all sorts of different stuff you can do there, but that's definitely some of the more common ones that I have seen with the customer workflow. And let me see if there's anything else. Again, workflows are just incredibly comprehensive. There's so much stuff you can do with it. It's really as far as what you can think of. And that's very common too with a lot of myself as a consultant. When we were assigned projects with our customers for workflow configuration, it's really a group effort of like, we come with all of the ideas on our end of like, hey, this is what we've done with customers, and then just try and help our customers kind of think of like, okay, like you were saying, this is what you're looking for, here's how it translates. So we really work one-on-one with our customers to help them get the best workflow for what makes sense for what they're looking for, and really just trying to automate as much as we can, because there's just so much stuff we can do in the back end, just make things so much easier and add so much more visibility. So beyond that though, that might be all I've got until the QA section, or questions and answers. Yeah, I think that's good. So I think we can move on to Q&A.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Kevin. I mean, I think you're right. Like, I'm not as technical as you are, but it definitely seems like the sky's the limit with workflows for sure. Curious, do you ever start with like looking at a customer's pain points and kind of figuring out where there might be some repetitive tasks, or, things that are taking like 5 hours a week, where you guys kind of do you tackle it from that angle ever?
Yeah. Um, yeah, that's with workflow. I feel there's so many different ways we've gone about it. Because sometimes we'll go with customers, we're just building it entirely from the ground up, which really helps too. Where we kind of like ask customers, like, hey, can you create a workflow diagram of like maybe how you think it's working or how you intend it to be? And then sometimes we'll kind of work backwards from there. And then other times it's working hand in hand with particular department leaders or members to be like, okay, like what specifically are you running into? What are you having to do manually? Cool. Let's see how that translates to the software. How can we automate that or make that easier for you? So there's
Yeah.
a lot of different ways we've kind of gone about that.
Awesome. Going back to the visualizer, can that be exported? And like, what about making changes to it once it's exported?
Yeah, definitely. So workflow visualizer, a nice thing you can do with that is when you are in here, there's two different things. One, you can save it as an SVG file type. So an SVG file type is just something that's utilized with web browsers like Chrome, essentially. So I'm going to download that here. 1 second. All right, going to open that up. Sure. There you go. So that'd be one thing, just gives you kind of a read-only version, but at least that way you could send or share that to other users. Or if you're making changes to your workflow and you kind of want to have that visual for what it looked like before, you could do that. Also, so I know I didn't mention before, but if you are making changes to your workflow, exporting those, importing those through those buttons are very helpful because previous versions are not stored like other things in SalesPad. Otherwise, one thing you can do that's really cool too is you can copy to clipboard. So what that does is this is copying all the back end logic because essentially we integrate with something called Mermaid Editor to build these out. So we've got scripts that basically take all of your workflow configuration and spit it out to them through an API for what they're looking for. And once you copy that, there is a website called draw.io that I have over here. And it's actually able to interpret all of that code from them. So we can go over here. And this is a free website too. So I'll use this sometimes just myself. And I think you just basically link it to your Google account or something. But I can go to insert and then mermaid. And then I'm just gonna paste everything I just copied through that button in SalesPad. Click insert. And then there you go. That's your entire workflow. Now, if I want to, I can come in here. I can color coordinate things. I can add additional notes, move stuff around because maybe some queues or workflows where they have a lot of queues can be kind of messy. So maybe it makes sense to come in here and change it around, kind of clean up your lines and things like that. So that's definitely a good one that helps out a lot. But yeah, simple enough. And again, that's just draw.io. So draw.io.
Yeah, great tip. And then you can basically make changes in that and then import back into SalesPad.
That you can't do. Potential
Okay,
future idea I would like to maybe do one day. We'll see.
got it. Good to know. Is it possible to control user access to documents based on the queue they're in?
Yeah, so it's gonna be a little bit different, depending on where you're doing that. For business objects, it's super nice because you can do that a lot easier just through the read-only security groups. And then on the sales order side of things, there is a security here in the security editor that usually will play a part in that. So if I go to sales document entry, I believe it is. Yep, there's a queue access list. So that way I could say for this particular security group, maybe I should only have access to, excuse me, these particular queues right here. So that'd be a great way to do that.
Kevin, it looks like that's going to conclude our questions. So thank you for that presentation. Thank you to all of you for joining us this afternoon. We hope to see you at some of our other upcoming webinars. We have lots more planned throughout the rest of the year. So definitely head on over to our events page on our website to see those. You'll once again be able to register for those webinars, but also view the webinars that you may have missed. If you have any questions as a follow-up to today's webinar, feel free to reach out to your account manager. They'd love to help. But if you're not quite sure who that person is, you're welcome to just shoot me an email at marketing@cavallo.com and we will put you in touch with the right person right away. So lastly, there's going to be a very short survey when you exit out. We greatly appreciate your feedback and thanks again for joining us and have a great day.
Thanks, Seth.